The gunshot that rang out across Tombstone's Main Street in the summer of 1882 was meant for Jack Sullivan. But it only grazed his shoulder because he was staring through the saloon windows at the woman singing on stage instead of watching his back. Blood seeped through his shirt as he stumbled into the Silver Dollar Saloon, one hand pressed against the wound while his eyes never left the stage where Evangeline Rose stood beneath the amber glow of oil lamps. Her voice carried through the smoky air like honey mixed with whiskey, rich and warm, and somehow sad all at once. She wore a crimson dress that hugged her curves, her dark hair pinned up with a few loose curls framing her face. Jack had seen plenty of saloon singers in his 26 years, but none of them had ever made him forget about the man trying to kill him outside. "You're bleeding on my floor," the bartender growled, but Jack barely heard him. Evangeline's eyes had found his across the crowded room, and for just a moment, her voice faltered. She recovered quickly, finishing her song while Jack finally remembered to breathe. Someone grabbed his good arm and hauled him toward a chair. "Sit down before you pass out, you fool," Doc Weatherby said, already pulling medical supplies from his bag. The old physician had been drinking at the bar when Jack stumbled in, which was lucky because the nearest hospital was 50 miles away in Tucson. What happened this time? "Riley Garrett finally made good on his threats," Jack said through gritted teeth as Doc cut away his shirt. The wound burned like hellfire, but he kept his eyes on the stage. Evangeline had started another song, something slow and melancholy about lost love and dusty trails. Her voice wrapped around him like a blanket, somehow making the pain more bearable. "You need to leave town," Doc said, pouring whiskey over the wound. Jack hissed but did not look away from Evangeline. "Riley's not going to stop until you're dead." "Whatever you did to make him this angry, it was not worth dying over." "I caught him cheating at cards and called him out in front of half the town," Jack said. "Man like that cannot let it stand. Man like you cannot seem to keep your head down either." Doc started stitching, his hands steady despite the whiskey he had consumed. "Though I reckon you have bigger problems now than Riley Garrett." "What do you mean?" Doc nodded toward the stage. "You have been staring at Evangeline Rose like she is the second coming. Every man in this saloon has noticed, including the ones who work for Marcus Bentley." Jack's jaw tightened. Marcus Bentley owned the Silver Dollar Saloon and half the businesses in Tombstone. He also considered Evangeline his personal property, though she wore no ring and had never been seen on his arm in public. The arrangement was clear to everyone in town. Bentley provided protection and a place to sing, and Evangeline stayed loyal to his establishment. What happened behind closed doors was nobody's business, but the rumors ran wild anyway. "I am just listening to the music," Jack said, though even he did not believe it. "Sure you are." Doc tied off the stitches and wrapped a clean bandage around Jack's shoulder. "And I am just here for the quality of the whiskey. Listen, son, I have known you since you rode into town 3 years ago with nothing but a horse and a saddle to your name. You have worked harder than any man I have seen, built up that ranch of yours from nothing, kept your nose clean for the most part. Do not throw it all away over a woman you cannot have." But Jack was not listening anymore. Evangeline had finished her song and was stepping off the stage, weaving through the tables toward the back rooms. Her eyes met his one more time as she passed, and something in that look made his heart hammer in his chest. It was not an invitation exactly, but it was not indifference either. It was recognition, maybe even curiosity. "I need another drink," Jack said, standing up despite Doc's protests. "You need to go home and rest before that wound gets infected." Jack ignored him and walked to the bar, fishing coins from his pocket with his good hand. The bartender poured him a whiskey without comment, though his expression made it clear what he thought about Jack's presence here tonight. Around them, the saloon buzzed with conversation and the clinking of glasses. A piano player had taken over now that Evangeline's set was finished, pounding out a jaunty tune that did not match Jack's mood at all. "You are making a mistake." The voice came from his left, smooth and dangerous. Jack turned to find Marcus Bentley standing there in an expensive suit, his silver hair slicked back and his cold blue eyes assessing. At 45, Bentley was still a handsome man, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who owned everything he surveyed. "Evangeline is not for you." "I am just having a drink," Jack said evenly, though his hand itched to reach for the gun at his hip. He had left it there despite the pain in his shoulder, muscle memory and instinct too ingrained to ignore. "You were staring at what belongs to me." Bentley stepped closer, his voice dropping low enough that only Jack could hear. "I know every man in this town fantasizes about her. She is beautiful, talented, everything a man could want, but she is mine, Sullivan. I have invested considerable time and money into her career, and I do not appreciate cowboys with dirt under their fingernails thinking they have a chance." Jack's jaw clenched, anger flaring hot in his chest. "Evangeline is a person, not property. Last I checked, slavery ended nearly 20 years ago." Bentley's smile did not reach his eyes. Spoken like a man who understands nothing about how the world works, Evangeline came to me with nothing. No money, no prospects, running from a past she would not talk about. I gave her everything. This stage, those dresses, that room upstairs where she sleeps safe every night. In return, she sings in my saloon and keeps me company when I require it. That is not slavery, Sullivan. That is business. Does she see it that way? What Evangeline sees is irrelevant. The contract she signed is very clear about her obligations. Bentley finished his own drink and set the glass down with a sharp click. "Now, I am going to give you a piece of advice because I respect the work you have done with that ranch of yours. Stay away from her. Do not come back to this saloon. Do not even think about her, because if you do, you will find that Riley Garrett is the least of your problems." Bentley walked away before Jack could respond, disappearing into the crowd with the easy grace of a man used to getting his way. Jack stood at the bar, his shoulder throbbing and his mind racing. He should leave. Doc was right. Bentley was right. Every sensible part of his brain was screaming at him to finish his drink and walk out that door. He had worked too hard to build his ranch into something profitable, to throw it away over a woman he had never even spoken to. But then he remembered the way Evangeline's voice had wrapped around him, the way her eyes had met his across the crowded room, and he knew he was already in too deep to walk away now. Jack drained his whiskey and headed for the door, but instead of leaving the saloon, he circled around to the back alley. The night air was hot and dry, typical for Arizona in July, and the sounds of the saloon were muffled by thick adobe walls. He knew he was being a fool, knew that nothing good could come from what he was about to do, but his feet kept moving anyway. The back door opened, and Evangeline stepped out into the alley, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders despite the heat. She was not surprised to see him standing there, which meant she had been expecting him, or hoping for him, maybe. "You should not be here," she said, but she did not move to go back inside. "I know." Jack stayed where he was, giving her space. Up close, she was even more beautiful than she had been on stage. Her eyes were green, he realized, the color of new grass after spring rain. She had a dusting of freckles across her nose that her stage makeup had hidden, and a small scar on her chin that only added character to her face. "I am Jack Sullivan. I know who you are." Evangeline pulled the shawl tighter, though it was not cold. "Everyone in Tombstone knows about the cowboy who built a ranch from nothing. They say you are honest, hardworking, decent. They also say you are stubborn as a mule and twice as dumb when you get an idea in your head. That sounds about right." Jack took a step closer, then stopped when he saw her tense. "I have been coming to hear you sing for 6 months now. Every Saturday night, I sit in the back and listen to you, and every Saturday night I tell myself I will introduce myself next time. But I never did because I knew what people would say, what Bentley would do. Then tonight, Riley Garrett shot me, and I realized that if I am going to die anyway, I might as well die having talked to the woman whose voice has been keeping me awake at night." Evangeline's expression softened slightly. "Riley Garrett shot you. Are you all right?" Doc stitched me up. I will live, he gestured to his bandaged shoulder. Though Bentley made it clear that coming near you again might be more dangerous than any bullet. Marcus does not own me, Evangeline said, but there was no conviction in her voice. Not really? Then why do you stay? She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I have nowhere else to go, because Marcus is right that he gave me everything when I had nothing. Because the alternative to singing in his saloon is something I do not want to think about. Jack's heart ached at the resignation in her tone. What if there was another alternative? What if you did not have to stay here? Then I would be interested to hear it, Mr. Sullivan, because in my experience, men who make promises like that are usually lying. But despite her words, there was hope in her eyes, fragile and desperate. Before Jack could respond, the back door slammed open and Marcus Bentley stepped out, flanked by two large men Jack recognized as his hired muscle. Bentley's expression was murderous as he took in the scene, his gaze moving from Jack to Evangeline and back again. I warned you, Sullivan, Bentley said softly, dangerously. I told you to stay away from what is mine. And I told you that Evangeline is not property, Jack replied, his hand drifting toward his gun. His shoulder screamed in protest, but he ignored it. Do not. Evangeline grabbed his arm, her touch sending electricity through him even in the midst of danger. Please, just go. This is not worth dying over. She is right, Bentley said, though his tone suggested he would be perfectly happy if Jack chose to ignore the advice. Walk away now and we will forget this ever happened. Stay, and my associates here will make sure you leave Tombstone in a pine box. The two men cracked their knuckles in unison, clearly hoping Jack would choose violence. They were both bigger than him, both armed, and Jack was already injured. The smart play was to leave, regroup, maybe come back with a better plan. But when he looked at Evangeline's face, saw the fear and the hope warring there, he knew he could not just abandon her to Bentley's control. I am not going anywhere, Jack said quietly. Not unless Evangeline tells me to go herself. You stupid, stubborn fool, Evangeline breathed, but there was something like admiration in her voice now, Bentley's face flushed with anger. Fine. You want to play the hero? Let us see how heroic you feel when you are choking on your own blood. He nodded to his men, who started forward with matching grins. Jack drew his gun, the movement sending fresh agony through his wounded shoulder, but his hand was steady. The two thugs stopped, suddenly less confident when faced with a man who knew how to use a weapon. Bentley's expression tightened. You would not shoot unarmed men, Bentley said, though he sounded less certain now. They look pretty armed to me, Jack replied, nodding toward the knives and brass knuckles the two men carried. And I am well within my rights to defend myself against an attack. The law in Tombstone might be flexible about a lot of things, but even Marshal White would have trouble ignoring two of your men beating a man to death in an alley. The standoff stretched for several heartbeats, tension crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. Then Evangeline stepped forward, placing herself between Jack and Bentley in a move that took everyone by surprise. Enough, she said, her voice steady despite the fear Jack could see in her eyes. Marcus, if you hurt him, I will never sing for you again. I will burn that contract you love so much and walk out of Tombstone tonight, and you will have nothing. No singer, no draw for your customers, no return on your investment. Bentley stared at her like she had grown a second head. You would not dare. You signed a contract. A contract that would be worthless if I was gone, Evangeline replied. You can force me to stay, Marcus, but you cannot force me to sing. Not really. And we both know that a saloon singer who has lost her voice is worth nothing to you. The calculation was clear on Bentley's face. He had spent months promoting Evangeline, building her reputation, using her talent to draw customers from all over the territory. If she left or stopped performing, he would lose more than just money. He would lose face, prestige, the thing that mattered most to a man like him. This is not over, Bentley finally said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. That contract runs for another year, Evangeline. I own you until then, and if you think this cowboy is going to save you, you are more naive than I thought. He will realize what you are soon enough, just like all the others, and then you will come crawling back to me. He turned and stalked back into the saloon, his men following reluctantly. The door slammed shut, leaving Jack and Evangeline alone in the alley once more. The silence was deafening after the confrontation. Evangeline turned to face Jack, her expression a mixture of fear, anger, and something else he could not quite identify. You should not have done that. You just made an enemy of the most powerful man in Tombstone. I have had worse enemies, Jack said, holstering his gun. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving him dizzy and nauseous from the pain in his shoulder. He swayed slightly, and Evangeline caught his good arm to steady him. You are still bleeding, she said, noticing the fresh red stain spreading across his bandage. Doc's stitches must have torn when you drew your gun. It will keep until I get home. You will never make it home in this condition. Evangeline glanced at the saloon door, then seemed to make a decision. There is a boarding house 2 streets over run by Mrs. Chen. She is discreet and does not ask questions. Let me take you there. Jack wanted to argue, but his vision was starting to blur at the edges. He had lost more blood than he realized, and the confrontation had taken more out of him than he wanted to admit. All right, he managed. Evangeline supported him as they made their way through the dark streets of Tombstone, avoiding the main thoroughfare where too many curious eyes might see them together. The boarding house was a modest 2-story building with clean white curtains in the windows. Evangeline knocked in a specific pattern, and a moment later a small Chinese woman opened the door. Miss Rose, Mrs. Chen said in lightly accented English, her eyes widening when she saw Jack's condition. What happened? He needs a room and medical attention, Evangeline said. Can you help us? I will pay whatever you need. Mrs. Chen hesitated for only a moment before nodding and ushering them inside. She led them upstairs to a small but clean room, then disappeared to fetch water and fresh bandages. Jack collapsed onto the bed, his strength finally giving out. You did not have to do this, he said, as Evangeline lit the oil lamp on the bedside table. The warm light cast shadows across her face, making her look younger and more vulnerable than she had on stage. You got shot because you were too busy watching me sing to watch your back, she replied, pulling a chair close to the bed. And then you refused to leave when Bentley threatened you, all because of me. The least I can do is make sure you do not die from blood loss. I got shot because Riley Garrett is a sore loser, and I refused to leave because I meant what I said about you not being property. Jack studied her face, trying to understand the woman behind the beautiful exterior. Bentley said you were running from something when you came to Tombstone. You do not have to tell me what, but I want you to know that whatever it was, it does not matter to me. Evangeline's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You do not know that. You do not know anything about me. Then tell me. I have got nothing but time right now, Mrs. Chen returned with supplies before Evangeline could respond. The older woman worked efficiently, removing Jack's ruined bandage and cleaning the wound with practiced hands. She clucked her tongue disapprovingly when she saw the torn stitches. This needs proper care, she said. I will restitch, but you must rest. No more fighting, no more heroics. Understand, Jack nodded, gritting his teeth as Mrs. Chen worked. Evangeline held his good hand through the process, her grip tight and her face pale. When it was finally done, Mrs. Chen wrapped fresh bandages and stood back to survey her work. Sleep now, she ordered. I will bring soup later. Miss Rose, you should go before people start asking questions. I will stay a while longer, Evangeline said softly, just to make sure he is all right, Mrs. Chen looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Evangeline's expression stopped her. She nodded and left, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Alone again, Jack and Evangeline sat in companionable silence, the sounds of Tombstone at night drifting through the open window. I grew up in St. Louis, Evangeline finally said, her voice so quiet Jack had to strain to hear her. My father was a banker, respectable and well-off. We had a nice house, servants, everything a girl could want. But when I was 18, he arranged for me to marry a business associate of his. A man named Harrison Blackwell, who was 40 years old and had already buried 2 wives. Jack's hand tightened around hers, but he did not interrupt. I refused, Evangeline continued. I told my father I would not marry a man I did not love, that I wanted to choose my own future. He said I was being foolish, that women did not get to make those choices. We fought, and I said things I regret now. That night I took what money I could carry and ran. I thought I could make it as a singer in the theaters of San Francisco, that my talent would be enough. What happened? I made it as far as Kansas City before my money ran out. I tried to find work, but theaters wanted experience I did not have, and the jobs available to women with no references or family were not the kind I wanted. I was desperate, sleeping in alleys, going days without food. Then I met a man named Thomas who said he could help me. He was charming, handsome, said all the right things. I was young and stupid enough to believe him. Evangeline's voice cracked slightly, and she paused to compose herself. Jack waited, his heart aching for what he knew was coming. Thomas ran a string of brothels across the frontier, she said flatly. He took me to one in Denver, locked me in a room and told me what my new job was. I tried to fight, tried to escape, but there were always guards, always locked doors. For 6 months, I lived in that hell, until one night when a fire broke out in the kitchen. In the chaos, I managed to slip away. I stole a horse and rode south until I hit Tombstone. I had nothing but the dress on my back and a voice that was the only thing Thomas had never taken from me. I am so sorry, Jack said, inadequate words for such trauma. Marcus found me the first night I was here, starving and terrified, and certain Thomas would track me down. He offered me a job singing at the Silver Dollar, a room upstairs, protection from anyone who might come looking for me. All I had to do was sign a contract and agree to his terms. Evangeline laughed bitterly. It seemed like a miracle at the time. I did not realize I was just trading one cage for another, slightly prettier one. Does Bentley force you to? Jack could not finish the sentence. No, Evangeline said quickly. Not like that, but he makes it clear that his protection comes with expectations. Loyalty, exclusivity, gratitude. He controls where I go, who I talk to, what songs I sing. And the contract I signed gives him legal ownership of my services for 3 years. I have 1 year left and then I am free. At least, that is what I keep telling myself. Jack absorbed all of this, his mind working through the implications. Evangeline was not just a saloon singer trapped by circumstance. She was a survivor, a fighter, someone who had endured horrors that would have broken weaker people. The fact that she could still sing with such beauty and emotion after everything she had been through spoke to a strength of spirit that humbled him. Come to my ranch, he said suddenly. Evangeline blinked. What? Come to my ranch? It is 15 miles outside of town, far enough from Bentley's reach that he cannot stop you. I have a house, land, plenty of space. You can stay there until the contract runs out and then you will be free. No obligations, no expectations. Just safety and time to figure out what you want to do next. Jack, I cannot just leave. Marcus will come after me, and if he does not, Thomas might still be looking. And even if neither of them find me, I have nowhere to go after the year is up. No money, no prospects, no future except more of the same. Then we will figure something out, Jack said firmly. Together, I know I am not much, just a cowboy with a ranch and more stubbornness than sense, according to you. But I can promise you this, as long as I am breathing, nobody will hurt you again. Not Bentley, not Thomas, not anyone. Evangeline stared at him, tears streaming down her face now. Why would you do this for me? You do not even know me. Because 6 months ago, I walked into the Silver Dollar Saloon and heard you sing, and something in my chest just cracked wide open, Jack said honestly. Because every Saturday night since then, I have sat in the back of that saloon and listened to you pour your heart out in song, and I have fallen a little more in love with you each time. Because when Bentley threatened me tonight, all I could think about was getting you away from him, keeping you safe, giving you the freedom you deserve." "They will call you a fool," Evangeline whispered. "Everyone in Tombstone will say you are an idiot for falling in love with a saloon singer, for throwing away everything you have built for a woman with a past like mine." Jack smiled despite the pain radiating through his shoulder. "Let them call me a fool. I have been called worse. The way I see it, the only foolish thing would be walking away from you now." Evangeline leaned forward and kissed him, soft and tentative and tasting of salt from her tears. Jack's good arm came up to cup her face, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. When they finally pulled apart, Evangeline was smiling through her tears. "You really are a fool, Jack Sullivan," she said softly. "Does that mean you will come with me? I do not know. I need time to think, to plan. Leaving Bentley is not as simple as just walking away, and I cannot put you in more danger than you are already in." Evangeline stood, smoothing down her dress. "Rest now. Let yourself heal. We will figure out the rest later. When will I see you again?" "I sing at the Silver Dollar every night except Sunday. You know where to find me." She moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. "Jack, thank you for seeing me as more than just a saloon singer, for offering me hope when I thought I had none left. Whatever happens, I will never forget that." Then she was gone, slipping out into the night like a ghost. Jack lay back against the pillows, his shoulder throbbing and his mind reeling from everything that had happened. He had come to Tombstone 3 years ago looking for a fresh start, a chance to build something of his own after spending his youth drifting from ranch to ranch. He had worked dawn to dusk, saving every penny until he finally had enough to buy a small spread outside of town. It was not much, just a modest house and enough land to run a small herd of cattle, but it was his. Now he was risking all of that for a woman he had spoken to for less than an hour. Doc was right that he was a fool. Bentley was right that he was in over his head. But as Jack drifted off to sleep, all he could think about was the way Evangeline's voice had wrapped around him like a promise, and he knew that even if this ended badly, he would not regret a single moment. The next few days passed in a blur of fever and pain. Mrs. Chen tended to Jack's wound with patient efficiency, changing bandages and forcing him to eat soup even when he had no appetite. Evangeline came to visit every night after her performances at the Silver Dollar, always careful to arrive late when the streets were empty and nobody would see her. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Jack told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 15, about the years he spent working other people's ranches before finally scraping together enough money to buy his own land. Evangeline shared more stories from her childhood, the good memories before everything went wrong. She talked about her mother who had died when she was 12, about the music lessons that were the only indulgence her strict father had allowed, about the dreams she had harbored of singing on proper stages in front of audiences who appreciated art rather than just wanting background noise for their drinking. "Do you ever think about going back?" Jack asked one night as they sat by the window, watching the stars wheel across the desert sky. "To St. Louis, I mean, making peace with your father." Evangeline was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes. But then I remember the look on his face when I refused to marry Harrison Blackwell. The disappointment, the anger. He told me I was throwing away my future, that no respectable man would ever want me after I defied him. I suppose he was right about that last part." "He was wrong," Jack said firmly. "You are not damaged goods, Evangeline. You are brave and talented and stronger than anyone I have ever met. What happened to you was not your fault, and anyone who cannot see that does not deserve you." She leaned her head against his good shoulder, a gesture that had become comfortable and familiar over the past few days. "You have a dangerous habit of saying exactly what I need to hear. I just tell the truth as I see it." By the end of the week, Jack's fever had broken and the wound was healing cleanly. Doc Weatherby came to check on him, grumbling about stubborn cowboys who did not have the sense to stay down. "You are lucky Mrs. Chen knows what she is doing," Doc said as he examined the stitches. "Another few days and you should be able to move around without tearing these open again. But no riding, no heavy lifting, and for God's sake, no more confrontations with Bentley's thugs." "I will do my best," Jack said, which was not quite a promise. Doc gave him a knowing look. "The whole town is talking about you and Evangeline. Bentley is furious, Riley Garrett is still looking for revenge, and half the men in Tombstone think you are either the bravest or stupidest person they have ever seen. Probably both. What do you think?" "I think you are going to get yourself killed if you are not careful, but I also think Evangeline Rose is lucky to have someone willing to fight for her." Doc packed up his supplies and stood. "Be smart about this, Jack. Bentley has money and influence and men willing to do his dirty work. You have a good heart and a strong sense of right and wrong, but that will not stop a bullet." After Doc left, Jack spent the afternoon planning. He could not stay at the boarding house forever, but going back to the ranch while Bentley and Riley Garrett both wanted him dead seemed like suicide. What he needed was leverage, something to make Bentley back off and give Evangeline the freedom to choose her own path. The answer came to him as he was watching Mrs. Chen work in her small garden behind the boarding house. Bentley's power came from his businesses, his reputation, his control over people like Evangeline. But that control was only as strong as the contracts and agreements that backed it up. If Jack could prove that Bentley had coerced Evangeline into signing her contract, or that the terms were exploitative and legally questionable, maybe he could break her free without violence. He would need help, though. Someone who understood the law and was not afraid to go up against Marcus Bentley. Jack's mind turned to Judge Samuel Harrington, a retired federal judge who had settled in Tombstone after spending 30 years on the bench in California. Harrington had a reputation for fairness and a deep hatred for anyone who exploited the vulnerable. If Jack could get Evangeline's contract to him, maybe the judge could find a way to invalidate it. That evening, when Evangeline arrived for her nightly visit, Jack laid out his plan. She listened intently, hope and fear warring on her face. "Even if Judge Harrington says the contract is invalid, Marcus will not just let me go," she said. "He has too much invested, too much pride at stake." "Then we make sure the whole town knows what he has been doing," Jack replied. "We take the story to the newspaper, get it printed so everyone can see the truth. Bentley can weather a lot of things, but public scandal is not one of them. If people know he has been holding you against your will, forcing you to work under an illegal contract, his reputation will be destroyed." "And what happens to me when my reputation is destroyed along with his? I will never be able to sing anywhere respectable after this. No theater or saloon will touch me." Jack took her hands in his. "Then you will sing for me, on the ranch, in the house, wherever you want. You will sing because you love it, not because someone is forcing you to. And when you are ready, when enough time has passed, maybe we can find somewhere new. California, Oregon, somewhere nobody knows our names or our pasts. We can start fresh together." "You keep saying we," Evangeline said softly. "Like this is your fight too, like we are in this together." "We are. I know it has only been a week. I know people will say it is too fast, but I also know that I love you, Evangeline Rose. I have loved you since the first time I heard you sing, and I will keep loving you for as long as you will let me." Evangeline's eyes filled with tears again, but this time she was smiling. "I love you too. I did not think I could feel this way about anyone after everything that happened, but you make me believe in good things again. In safety, in kindness, in futures that do not involve just surviving day to day." They kissed then, slow and deep and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Evangeline's expression had hardened with determination. "All right," she said. "Let us do this. Let us get that contract and take it to Judge Harrington, but we have to be smart about it. Marcus keeps all his important documents in a safe in his office at the back of the saloon. It is locked, and he is the only one with the combination. Then we will have to get creative, Jack said, his mind already working through possibilities. Over the next 2 days, they formulated a plan. Evangeline would perform as usual at the Silver Dollar, but during her second set, she would complain of feeling faint. While Bentley and everyone else was distracted by her dramatic collapse, Jack would slip into the office through the back entrance and break into the safe. It was risky and relied on a lot of things going right, but it was the best option they had. On the night they chose to execute the plan, Jack's shoulder was still sore but functional. He dressed in dark clothes and made his way through the shadows to the alley behind the Silver Dollar. The sounds of Evangeline singing drifted through the walls, her voice achingly beautiful as always. He recognized the song, a ballad about a woman waiting for her love to return from war. It seemed almost prophetic given their circumstances. Jack counted down in his head, waiting for the signal. Right on cue, Evangeline's voice faltered and then stopped altogether. Through the thin walls, he heard the commotion as she collapsed on stage, people shouting and scrambling to help. Bentley's voice rose above the chaos, demanding someone fetch Doc Weatherby. Moving quickly, Jack slipped through the back door and into Bentley's office. The room was opulent in a way that seemed excessive for a saloon, with expensive furniture and paintings on the walls. The safe sat in the corner, a hulking iron beast with a combination lock. Jack pulled out the tools he had borrowed from Mrs. Chen's son, who had a somewhat questionable past that included time as a locksmith. His hands shook slightly as he pressed his ear to the safe door and began working the dial, listening for the subtle clicks that would tell him when he had the right numbers. It was delicate work, made harder by the adrenaline surging through his system and the sounds of confusion still coming from the main saloon floor. Sweat dripped into his eyes as he worked, precious seconds ticking away. Finally, blessedly, he heard the last click and the safe door swung open. Inside were stacks of cash, deeds to properties, and folders full of documents. Jack rifled through them quickly, looking for Evangeline's contract. He found it in a red folder labeled with her name, along with contracts for several other performers who worked at the Silver Dollar. Jack grabbed all of them, figuring that if Bentley was exploiting Evangeline, he was probably doing the same to others. He tucked the documents inside his shirt and closed the safe, spinning the dial to relock it. Then he slipped back out into the alley just as he heard Bentley's heavy footsteps approaching the office. Jack pressed himself against the wall, barely breathing, as Bentley entered the room and began rummaging around for something. For a terrifying moment, Jack thought Bentley would check the safe, but then someone called for him from the saloon and he left, slamming the door behind him. Jack waited until he was sure the coast was clear, then made his way back through the dark streets to Mrs. Chen's boarding house. Evangeline was already there when he arrived, having left the saloon as soon as her dramatic recovery allowed. Her face was pale but determined as Jack laid the contracts out on the table. "I got them," he said, unable to keep the triumph from his voice. "Your contract and several others. We take these to Judge Harrington tomorrow, and he will know what to do." Evangeline stared at the papers like they were poisonous snakes. "This is really happening. We are really doing this. We are, and no matter what comes next, we face it together." They spent that night reading through the contracts, documenting the exploitative terms and illegal clauses. Bentley had been clever, hiding his control behind legal language, but it was clear to anyone who looked closely that these were designed to trap people in permanent servitude. The contracts specified harsh penalties for breaking terms, gave Bentley ownership of any songs or performances created during the contract period, and included clauses that essentially allowed him to extend the terms indefinitely for vaguely defined infractions. "He did this to all of us," Evangeline said, looking at the other contracts with growing horror. "The piano player, the card dealers, even some of the waitresses. He finds people who are desperate, offers them a lifeline, and then uses these contracts to control them forever." "Not anymore," Jack said grimly. "Tomorrow we end this." Judge Samuel Harrington lived in a modest house on the outskirts of Tombstone, far from the noise and chaos of the main street. He was a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. When Jack and Evangeline arrived at his door early the next morning, he invited them in without question and listened to their story with the patience of someone who had heard countless tales of injustice over his long career. "May I see the contracts?" he asked when they finished. Evangeline handed them over, her hands shaking slightly. Judge Harrington spent nearly an hour reading through every page, making notes and occasionally shaking his head in disgust. Finally, he set them down and looked at Jack and Evangeline with an expression that was equal parts anger and determination. "These contracts are an abomination," he said bluntly. "Legally questionable, morally reprehensible, and designed specifically to exploit vulnerable people. In my opinion, they would not hold up in any legitimate court. The problem is that Tombstone does not have a legitimate court system right now. Marshall White does his best, but he is one man trying to maintain order in a town that thrives on chaos. Bentley knows this, which is why he has gotten away with it for so long. So there is nothing we can do?" Evangeline asked, despair creeping into her voice. "I did not say that." Judge Harrington stood and walked to his desk, pulling out paper and pen. "I am going to write an official legal opinion declaring these contracts invalid and unenforceable. I may be retired, but my judgments still carry weight, especially in the Arizona Territory. Then we are going to take this opinion, along with copies of the contracts, to the editor of the Tombstone epitaph. George Parsons is a good man who believes in the truth, even when it is inconvenient. If we can get this story printed, Bentley will have no choice but to back down or face consequences from the territorial government." Hope flared in Jack's chest. "You really think this will work?" "I think it is your best chance. Bentley is powerful, but he is not invincible. Men like him depend on operating in the shadows, on people being too afraid to speak up. Once his practices are exposed to the light, his power will crumble." Judge Harrington finished writing and signed his name with a flourish. "Of course, he will not go down without a fight. You need to be prepared for retaliation." "We are," Jack said, his hand instinctively going to the gun at his hip. He had started wearing it again once his shoulder healed enough to allow it. Judge Harrington noticed the gesture and frowned. "I was thinking more about legal retaliation, lawsuits, and the like. But if you are expecting violence, perhaps you should speak to Marshall White before we proceed. Get his protection. Make sure there are witnesses to everything that happens from this point forward." They took his advice, stopping by the marshal's office before heading to the newspaper. Virgil White was a lean man with a weathered face and the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much violence. He listened to their story with growing interest, occasionally glancing at the contracts and Judge Harrington's legal opinion. "I have suspected Bentley was up to something like this for a while now," Marshall White said, "but suspicion is not evidence, and without proof, I could not touch him. This changes things." He stood and buckled on his gun belt. "I am coming with you to the newspaper. If Bentley gets wind of what you are doing, he will try to stop you, and I want to make sure he does it legally." With Marshall White and Judge Harrington accompanying them, Jack and Evangeline made their way to the offices of the Tombstone epitaph. George Parsons, a portly man with ink-stained fingers and an energetic demeanor, greeted them with curiosity that turned to shock as he read through the documents they presented. "This is incredible," he breathed. "I knew Bentley was ruthless, but I had no idea he was running what amounts to an indentured servitude operation. This story will be on the front page of tomorrow's edition." "Be prepared for backlash," Judge Harrington warned. "Bentley has friends in this town, people who benefit from his business. Not everyone will be happy to see him taken down." "I have never been in the business of making people happy," Parsons replied with a grin. "I am in the business of printing the truth. Let me get to work on this. Come back tomorrow morning and you will have your story." They left the newspaper office with a mixture of relief and trepidation. The wheels were in motion now, and there was no going back. Jack wanted to take Evangeline straight out to his ranch where she would be safe from Bentley's immediate reach, but she insisted on returning to the silver dollar one last time. "I need to get my things," she explained. "Clothes, some jewelry my mother left me, letters from before everything went wrong. I cannot just abandon them." "I will come with you," Jack said. "No, if Bentley sees you, he will know something is wrong. Let me do this alone. I will be quick in and out before anyone notices." Jack did not like it, but he understood her reasoning. They agreed that Evangeline would collect her belongings while Jack waited at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. If she was not back within 2 hours, he would come looking for her with Marshall White in tow. Evangeline kissed him goodbye, long and sweet and tinged with fear. "Whatever happens, I love you, Jack Sullivan. You gave me hope when I thought I had none left, and I will never forget that." "Nothing is going to happen," Jack said firmly. "You are going to get your things, come back here, and then we are going to ride out to the ranch and start our life together. That is how this story ends." But as Evangeline disappeared into the growing dusk, Jack could not shake the feeling that things were about to get much worse before they got better. An hour passed, then 90 minutes. Jack paced the small room at the boarding house, his anxiety growing with each passing minute. Mrs. Chen brought him tea he did not drink and assured him in her calm way that everything would be fine, but Jack could not settle. Something was wrong. He felt it in his bones, the same instinct that had kept him alive through countless dangers on the frontier. When 2 hours passed with no sign of Evangeline, Jack grabbed his gun and headed for the door. Mrs. Chen did not try to stop him, just handed him a lantern and wished him luck. He made it 3 blocks before he heard the explosion. The sound echoed through Tombstone like thunder, followed by the orange glow of fire rising from the direction of the Silver Dollar Saloon. Jack broke into a run, his heart pounding with terror. People were streaming out of buildings, shouting and pointing at the flames. By the time Jack reached the main street, the entire front of the saloon was engulfed in fire. "Evangeline," he screamed, trying to push through the crowd. Strong hands grabbed him, held him back. He fought against them, desperate to get inside to find her, but more people joined in restraining him. "It is too late," someone said. "Nobody could survive that." "No." Jack's denial was guttural, primal. "No, she is in there. I have to get to her." "You will die if you go in there." Marshall White appeared beside him, his face grim. "I am sorry, Jack, but there is nothing you can do." Jack stopped fighting, the reality crashing over him like a wave. Evangeline was in that building. She had gone to get her things, and now the saloon was burning and she was gone. The woman he loved, the woman who had given him hope and purpose and made him believe in happy endings, was dead. The world narrowed to the flames and the terrible knowledge that he had failed her. He had promised to keep her safe, promised that nothing would happen, and now she was gone. Jack's legs gave out and he would have collapsed if Marshall White had not caught him. "Come on," the marshal said gently. "There is nothing more to see here." But Jack could not look away from the fire. It seemed impossible that just this morning they had been full of hope, planning their future together. How had it all gone so wrong so fast? "It was not an accident," a voice said behind him. Jack turned to see Doc Weatherby, his face illuminated by the flames. "I was having a drink at the bar when the explosion happened. It came from Bentley's office. Someone set a bomb." "Where is Bentley?" Jack asked, his voice dangerous. "He left about 30 minutes before the explosion, said he had business to attend to." Doc's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Jack, I know what you are thinking, but you cannot go after him without proof. That is what he wants. He wants you to come at him hot-headed and stupid so he can claim self-defense when he kills you." "I do not care." Jack pulled away from Marshall White, his grief transforming into cold, focused rage. He killed her. He burned down his own saloon rather than let her go free, and I am going to make him pay for it. "Not tonight, you are not." Marshall White's voice was firm. "Tonight, you are going to come back to my office and give me a statement about everything that happened." Then you are going to let me do my job and investigate this fire properly. If Bentley is responsible, I will arrest him and he will stand trial. But I cannot do that if you get yourself killed trying to play vigilante. Jack wanted to argue, wanted to ignore every rational word coming out of the marshal's mouth and hunt Bentley down like the animal he was. But through the haze of grief and rage, he recognized the wisdom in waiting. Bentley was expecting him to come charging in. The man had probably planned for it, set up some scenario where Jack's death could be justified. "Fine," Jack said hoarsely. "But if you do not find evidence against him if he walks away from this, then I am done playing by the rules." They were halfway to the marshal's office when Jack heard the shout. He turned to see a figure stumbling down the alley beside the burning saloon, covered in soot and coughing violently. His heart stopped, then started again with a painful lurch. Evangeline. He ran to her, catching her as she collapsed. Her dress was singed, her face smudged with ash, but she was alive, gloriously, impossibly alive. "How did you get out?" "Backstairs," she gasped, still coughing. "I heard them talking, Bentley's men, they were setting something in his office. I ran, got to my room, grabbed what I could. The explosion happened as I was going down the back stairs. I was trapped for a while, but I found another way out." Jack held her tight, relief washing over him so powerfully that his knees went weak. "I thought you were dead. I thought I lost you." "Not yet, Cowboy. Going to take more than fire to get rid of me." But despite her brave words, Evangeline was shaking, shock setting in. Doc Weatherby appeared with his medical bag and began checking her over for injuries. "Mostly smoke inhalation and some minor burns," he pronounced after a thorough examination. "She is lucky to be alive. Another few minutes and the smoke would have finished her." Marshal White was staring at Evangeline with the expression of someone fitting puzzle pieces together. "You heard Bentley's men setting the bomb, 2 of them. I did not see their faces, but I recognized the voices. They work for Marcus, have for years. They were laughing about how this would solve all his problems at once. Get rid of me, destroy the contracts before anyone else could see them, collect the insurance money. He planned this whole thing." "That is testimony," Marshal White said grimly. "That is enough for me to bring him in for questioning. Jack, take Evangeline somewhere safe. Doc, go with them and make sure she does not have any serious injuries. I am going to round up a posse and find Marcus Bentley." They ended up back at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, where the kind woman fussed over Evangeline and brought clean clothes and warm water for washing. Jack sat beside Evangeline's bed, holding her hand like he was afraid she would disappear if he let go. "I really thought you were dead," he said quietly. "For those few minutes, I thought I had lost you and it felt like the end of the world." "I know the feeling," Evangeline replied, squeezing his hand. "When I realized what Bentley had done, that he was willing to burn down his own saloon just to keep me under his control, I understood that he would never let me go. That there was no contract, no legal argument, no escape plan that would work. He would rather see me dead than free. He is not going to get that chance. Marshal White will arrest him, and between your testimony and Judge Harrington's legal opinion, Bentley will spend the rest of his life in prison." But things did not work out quite that neatly. Marshal White returned in the early hours of the morning with news that Marcus Bentley had fled Tombstone. He had left town shortly after setting the fire, taking what cash he could carry and heading south toward Mexico. The marshal had sent telegrams to every town along the border, but Bentley had a head start and connections that would help him disappear. "So he just gets away with it," Jack said bitterly. "After everything he did, he runs away and faces no consequences." "He lost everything," Marshal White pointed out. "His saloon, his businesses, his reputation. By tomorrow afternoon, every newspaper in the territory will be printing the story of how Marcus Bentley was running an exploitation operation and burned down his own building to cover it up. He will never be able to show his face in polite society again. That might not be justice exactly, but it is something." It was not enough for Jack, but he recognized that it was the best outcome they were likely to get. The important thing was that Evangeline was safe and free. The contract that had bound her to Bentley had literally gone up in flames, and Judge Harrington had already signed papers formally declaring it null and void anyway. She could go anywhere, do anything, and nobody could stop her. Over the next few weeks, Tombstone slowly returned to normal. The ruins of the Silver Dollar Saloon were cleared away, and new businesses moved in to fill the void. George Parsons ran follow-up stories about the other victims of Bentley's contracts, and several of them came forward with their own tales of exploitation. The territorial government launched an investigation into similar practices across Arizona, promising reforms to protect workers from predatory contracts. Jack and Evangeline stayed at Mrs. Chen's boarding house while Jack recovered fully from his shoulder wound, and Evangeline recovered from the trauma of the fire. They talked about the future in quiet moments, making plans that felt fragile and precious after everything they had been through. "I want to see your ranch," Evangeline said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "You have talked about it so much, but I have never actually been there." "It is not much," Jack warned, "just a small house and some land. Nothing fancy like you are probably used to." Fancy is overrated. "I grew up in a fancy house with servants and dinner parties, and I was miserable. Then I lived in fancy rooms provided by men who saw me as property, and I was even more miserable. Maybe what I need is something simple and real and mine." The next day, they rode out to Jack's ranch together. It was a beautiful morning, the desert air still cool before the heat of the day set in. The ride took about 2 hours, and Jack found himself seeing the landscape through Evangeline's eyes. The stark beauty of the saguaro cacti standing like sentinels, the distant mountains purple against the horizon, the endless blue sky that seemed to go on forever. The ranch house was modest, a simple wood and adobe structure with a covered porch and shuttered windows. But it was solid and well-maintained, built by Jack's own hands over the past 3 years. Around it stretched corrals and a small barn, and beyond that, the open range where his cattle grazed. "It is perfect," Evangeline breathed, dismounting and turning in a slow circle to take everything in. "Jack, it is absolutely perfect." He helped her down, pleasure warming his chest at her enthusiasm. "You have not even seen inside yet." The interior was sparse but clean, with a main room that served as kitchen and living space, a small bedroom, and a loft overhead that Jack had been slowly converting into additional living space. The furniture was simple but sturdy, most of it made by Jack himself during long winter evenings. Evangeline walked through the house, touching things gently, looking out the windows at the view. When she turned back to Jack, there were tears in her eyes. "I could be happy here," she said softly. "I could build a life here, with you if you still want me." Jack crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. "Of course I want you. I have wanted you since the moment I heard you sing. The question is whether you really want this. It is a hard life out here, Evangeline, isolated, difficult work, none of the comforts you grew up with. I need you to be sure before you commit to something you might regret. I have had comfort and I have had luxury, and neither made me happy," Evangeline said firmly. "What I want is freedom, safety, and the chance to build something real with someone who actually sees me as a person. You offer all of that. So yes, Jack Sullivan, I am sure. If you will have me, I want to stay here with you and make this ranch our home." They married quietly the following week in Judge Harrington's parlor, with Doc Weatherby and Mrs. Chen as witnesses. There was no big ceremony, no fancy dress or elaborate celebration. Just 2 people who had found each other against all odds, promising to love and support each other for the rest of their lives. Marshall White attended, as did George Parsons from the newspaper. A few of Jack's neighbors from surrounding ranches came as well, curious about the woman their friend had fallen for and willing to give her a chance despite her past. Evangeline wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, and Jack wore his best suit, the one he had bought for special occasions and almost never had reason to wear. "Do you, John Henry Sullivan, take Evangeline Marie Rose to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Judge Harrington asked. "I do," Jack said, his voice steady and sure. "And do you, Evangeline Marie Rose, take John Henry Sullivan to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Evangeline's voice was quiet but firm, her hand squeezing Jack's as she spoke. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Jack did, softly and sweetly, and the small gathering erupted in applause. It was not the fairy tale wedding Evangeline might have imagined as a girl, but it was real and meaningful and filled with people who genuinely cared about their happiness. That made it more precious than any elaborate ceremony could have been. They honeymooned at the ranch, spending lazy days learning the rhythms of life together. Evangeline threw herself into making the house feel like a home, sewing curtains and planting a small garden near the porch. Jack taught her how to ride properly and how to shoot a rifle in case she ever needed to defend herself while he was out working the cattle. In the evenings, she would sing for him. Not the sad saloon songs she had been forced to perform, but joyful ballads and folk tunes from her childhood. Her voice filled the small house with beauty, and Jack would sit and listen with his eyes closed, still unable to believe that this incredible woman had chosen him. Life was not without its challenges. The ranch work was hard and never-ending, especially during calving season and summer roundups. Money was tight, with Jack reinvesting most of his profits into expanding the herd and improving the property. There were times when Evangeline's past caught up with her, nightmares that woke her in the middle of the night or moments when she would see a stranger in town and panic, thinking it was Thomas or one of Bentley's men come to drag her back. But they faced each challenge together, learning to lean on each other's strengths and support each other through weaknesses. Jack discovered that Evangeline had a head for numbers and organization, and she took over managing the ranch's books and correspondence. Evangeline discovered that physical work, tending the garden and helping with the animals, was therapeutic in ways she had not expected. 6 months into their marriage, Evangeline realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She had never imagined herself as a mother, had not dared to hope for a normal life that included children and a family. But here she was, carrying Jack's child, and the reality of it was overwhelming. "What if I am not good at this?" She asked one night as they lay in bed, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "What if the things that happened to me broke something inside and I cannot be the mother this baby deserves?" "That is not going to happen," Jack said firmly, covering her hand with his. "You are the strongest person I know, Evangeline. You survived things that would have destroyed other people, and you came out the other side with your heart still intact. Our child is lucky to have you as a mother. You really believe that? I know it. Just like I know that we are going to figure this out together, one day at a time. That is what we have been doing since the moment we met, and it has worked pretty well so far." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite Evangeline's fears. Doc Weatherby rode out to the ranch once a month to check on her, pronouncing both mother and baby healthy. Mrs. Chen visited as well, bringing gifts and advice from her own experiences raising 5 children. The community that had been cautious about accepting Evangeline gradually warmed to her, won over by her kindness and the obvious love between her and Jack. In the spring of 1883, nearly a year after that fateful night when Jack had been shot outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, Evangeline gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Henry after Jack's father, and from the moment he came into the world crying and red-faced and perfect, both parents were completely smitten. "He has your eyes," Evangeline said, exhausted but happy as she cradled Henry in her arms. "And your stubborn chin." "Poor kid," Jack replied, but he was smiling through tears as he looked at his son. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe this is real." "It is real," Evangeline assured him. This is our life now, our family, everything we fought for. Raising Henry was both harder and more rewarding than either of them had anticipated. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the sheer amount of work required to keep a tiny human alive and thriving. But there were also moments of pure joy. Henry's first smile, his first word, the way he would reach for Jack when he came in from working the cattle and babble excitedly about nothing in particular. As Henry grew from infant to toddler, Evangeline continued to sing. Not in saloons or for money, but for her son and her husband. She sang lullabies that put Henry to sleep and folk songs that made him laugh and dance. She sang while she worked in the garden and while she cooked dinner, her voice a constant presence that filled their home with beauty. Jack would often stop what he was doing just to listen, still amazed that this was his life. Sometimes, when friends or neighbors visited and heard Evangeline singing, they would suggest she perform in town at one of the new establishments that had opened after the Silver Dollar burned down. She always politely declined. "She sings only for me now," Jack would say, and Evangeline would smile and squeeze his hand, both of them understanding what he meant. Her voice, her talent, her heart were no longer commodities to be bought and sold. They were hers to give freely, and she chose to give them to the people she loved. 2 years after Henry was born, Evangeline became pregnant again. This time, she approached the pregnancy with more confidence, knowing what to expect and trusting in her ability to be a good mother. Their second child was a girl, born during a thunderstorm in August of 1885. They named her Clara after Evangeline's mother. With 2 children, the ranch house felt smaller than ever. Jack spent the next year expanding, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room. He also bought more land from a neighbor who was moving east, increasing their holdings and allowing them to expand the herd. The ranch was becoming prosperous, not wealthy exactly, but comfortable in a way that gave them security and options. Evangeline sometimes thought about her father in St. Louis, wondered if he ever regretted the way they had parted. She had written to him once, shortly after Henry was born, letting him know that she was alive and happy and married. She had not expected a response and did not receive one, but she hoped that somewhere deep down, he was glad she had found her way to a good life despite everything. One afternoon, when Henry was 4 and Clara was 2, a stranger rode up to the ranch house. Jack tensed, his hand going to his gun, but the man held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "I am looking for Evangeline Rose," the stranger said. He was older, probably in his 50s, with gray hair and tired eyes. "I was told she might be living here." "I am Evangeline Sullivan now," Evangeline said, stepping out onto the porch with Clara on her hip and Henry peeking out from behind her skirts. "Who are you?" "My name is Robert Harrison. I was Marcus Bentley's attorney." He saw the way both Jack and Evangeline stiffened and hurried to continue. "I am not here on his behalf. In fact, I am here to tell you that Marcus Bentley died 3 months ago in Mexico, yellow fever, according to the reports." Evangeline absorbed this news without visible emotion. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because before he died, he wrote a letter. He was delirious with fever, probably did not know what he was doing, but he wrote it nonetheless." Harrison pulled a folded paper from his pocket and held it out. "I thought you should have it. You are under no obligation to read it, but I wanted you to know that he is gone and cannot hurt you anymore." Jack took the letter, his expression wary. "Thank you for bringing this. Is there anything else?" "Just this. I worked for Marcus Bentley for 10 years and I helped him do a lot of terrible things to a lot of people. I told myself it was just business, that I was just doing my job. But the truth is, I knew what he was and I enabled him anyway. I cannot undo that, but I want you to know that I am sorry. For whatever that is worth." Harrison turned and rode away before either of them could respond. Jack and Evangeline stood on the porch, the letter heavy in Jack's hand. "Do you want to read it?" he asked. Evangeline considered for a long moment, then shook her head. "No. Whatever Marcus had to say, it does not matter anymore. He does not get to have the last word in my story." She took the letter and walked over to the fire pit where they burned trash. Without hesitation, she dropped the letter into the flames and watched it curl and blacken. "That part of my life is over. This is my life now." Jack wrapped his arms around her from behind, careful not to disturb Clara, who was dozing on her mother's shoulder. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too, more than I ever thought possible." The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growing of their children. Henry grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved helping his father with the cattle and could spend hours watching the animals. Clara was her mother's daughter, with a beautiful singing voice that she used constantly and a dramatic flair that kept everyone entertained. When Henry was 10 and Clara was 8, Evangeline gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Daniel and Sarah. The ranch house, which had seemed so spacious after the expansion, suddenly felt crowded and chaotic. But it was a good kind of chaos, filled with laughter and noise and life. Jack hired help to manage the cattle, allowing him to spend more time with his growing family. Evangeline started teaching Clara and Henry music, passing on the skills her own mother had taught her. The sound of singing became such a constant presence at the Sullivan ranch that neighbors joked you could find your way there just by following the music. On their 10th anniversary, Jack surprised Evangeline with a piano he had ordered all the way from San Francisco. It had taken months to arrive and cost more than he wanted to admit, but the look on her face when it was delivered made every penny worth it. "Jack, this is too much," she protested, though her fingers were already itching to touch the keys. "Nothing is too much for you," he replied. "You gave up everything to be here with me. The least I can do is make sure you have the tools to keep doing what you love." Evangeline played that piano every day, sometimes alone and sometimes with the children gathered around singing along. The music that poured from the ranch house was joyful and free, untainted by the pain of her past. It was the sound of a woman who had survived hell and come out the other side stronger, the sound of a family built on love and trust and second chances. One evening, when all 4 children were finally asleep and Jack and Evangeline had a rare moment of peace, they sat on the porch watching the stars. It had become their tradition over the years, this quiet time together after the chaos of the day. "Do you ever regret it?" Jack asked. "Giving up singing professionally, you could have been famous, performed in theaters across the country. Instead, you are stuck on a ranch in Arizona with a cowboy and a bunch of kids." Evangeline laughed softly. "Stuck, is that what you think I am? I just want to make sure you are happy. That you do not feel like you gave up your dreams for me. Jack, you gave me new dreams, better dreams, dreams I did not even know I could have." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "When I was singing in saloons, I felt like I was dying inside a little more each day. But here, with you, with our children, I am more alive than I have ever been. I still sing, but now I sing because I want to, not because someone is forcing me. I sing for love, not for money. That is worth more than any stage or applause ever could be." "They used to call me a fool," Jack said, remembering those early days in Tombstone, "for falling in love with a saloon singer, for throwing away everything I had built for a woman with a past. And what do they call you now? Lucky. They call me the luckiest man in Arizona." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. And they are right. Time continued its steady march forward. Henry grew into a young man who decided to study law, wanting to help people the way Judge Harrington had helped his mother. Clara became a music teacher, traveling to nearby ranches and farms to give lessons to other children. Daniel took over more of the ranch operations as Jack got older, showing a natural talent for animal husbandry. Sarah, the youngest, became a writer, documenting the stories of the Old West before they were forgotten. Jack and Evangeline grew older together, their hair turning gray but their love never diminishing. They watched their children build their own lives, get married, have children of their own. The ranch that had once been a small, struggling operation became a thriving legacy passed down through generations. On the 40th anniversary of the night they met, Jack and Evangeline sat on their porch at sunset, just as they had countless times before. They were in their 60s now, weathered by time and hard work but still strong in all the ways that mattered. 40 years, Evangeline mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was standing on that stage at the Silver Dollar, singing my heart out and feeling like I was trapped forever. And then I looked up and saw this stubborn cowboy staring at me like I was something precious. You were precious. You are precious. Jack's voice was rougher with age but no less sincere. Best decision I ever made was walking into that saloon. Best decision I ever made was walking out the back door to meet you. Evangeline rested her head on his shoulder, comfortable and content. We have had a good life, Jack Sullivan. We have, and we are not done yet. He squeezed her hand gently. Still have plenty of years left to cause trouble and spoil grandchildren. They sat in companionable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of purple and gold. From inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and the cattle lowed in response. This was home. This was family. This was the life they had built together from nothing but love and determination, and a willingness to fight for each other. Everyone had called Jack a fool for falling in love with a saloon singer, for thinking he could save her from a life that seemed already determined. But he had proven them wrong. Together, he and Evangeline had proven that even the darkest pasts could be overcome, that love could be stronger than fear, and that happy endings were possible even in the harsh reality of the Wild West. "Sing for me," Jack requested softly, the way he had so many times over the years. Evangeline smiled and began to sing, her voice still beautiful even after decades. It was the same song she had been singing that first night when Jack stumbled into the Silver Dollar Saloon with a bullet wound in his shoulder. But now, instead of sadness and longing, her voice carried joy and contentment. She was singing the song of a woman who had found her home, her purpose, her happy ending. Jack listened with his eyes closed, just as he always did, and thought about how different his life might have been if he had not walked into that saloon on that particular night. He might have been safer, certainly, probably richer, definitely less troubled, but he would not have been happy. Not like this. Not with this fullness in his heart that came from building a life with someone who understood him completely. When Evangeline finished singing, Jack opened his eyes and found her watching him with that same mixture of love and amusement she had worn since their first real conversation in that alley behind the saloon. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just that they were wrong. Everyone who called me a fool was completely wrong. The only foolish thing would have been walking away from you. You never were very good at doing the sensible thing," Evangeline teased. "Lucky for both of us." As night fell completely and the stars began to emerge, Jack and Evangeline remained on their porch, surrounded by the evidence of their life together. The house they had built and expanded, the land they had worked and improved, the family they had raised and loved. This was their legacy, built on a foundation of courage and faith and a love story that had started in a smoky saloon in Tombstone, Arizona, and had grown into something neither of them could have imagined in those early, uncertain days. They called him a fool for loving a saloon singer. But Jack Sullivan had learned long ago that sometimes the wisest thing you could do was be a fool for love. And as he sat there with Evangeline in his arms, her voice still echoing in his memory, he knew with absolute certainty that every risk, every sacrifice, every moment of fear and uncertainty had been worth it, because she sang only for him now. And that made him the richest man in the world. The end of their story was not marked by tragedy or loss, but by the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. They grew old together on that ranch, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carried forward their legacy of love and resilience. When people in Tombstone told stories about the old days, about the wild times before the town was tamed, they always mentioned Jack Sullivan and his wife Evangeline. They talked about how he had been shot by Riley Garrett and still walked into Bentley's saloon to meet her. They talked about how she had survived a fire meant to kill her and still found the courage to start over. They talked about how Judge Harrington and Marshall White had helped bring down Marcus Bentley's empire of exploitation. But mostly, they talked about the love story that had endured through it all. Young couples would sometimes ride out to the Sullivan ranch, hoping for advice on how to build a marriage as strong as the one Jack and Evangeline had forged. The answer was always the same: honesty, respect, and a willingness to fight for each other no matter what obstacles stood in the way. Love is not enough by itself, Evangeline would tell them. You also need trust, communication, and the determination to work through problems instead of running from them. Jack and I have had our share of difficulties over the years. Times when money was tight, when the children were sick, when old fears and traumas resurfaced. But we faced all of it together, and that made us stronger. And you have to be willing to let go of what other people think, Jack would add. Everyone had an opinion about us getting together. They said it would never work, that we were too different, that Evangeline's past would always be a problem. We could have listened to them and walked away from each other. Instead, we chose to write our own story. Their golden years were marked by peace and contentment. Jack finally slowed down his ranch work, turning over most of the operations to Daniel while still helping out where he could. Evangeline spent her days teaching music to her grandchildren, tending her ever-expanding garden, and writing down the stories of her life for future generations to read. She never hid her past from her children or grandchildren. Instead, she used it as a teaching tool, a way to help them understand that mistakes and tragedies did not define a person. What mattered was how you responded, what you learned, and whether you had the courage to keep moving forward even when the path ahead was unclear. Your grandfather saved my life, she told them. But not in the way you might think. He did not rescue me from danger like a knight in a fairy tale. What he did was see me as a whole person worthy of love and respect, even when I could not see that in myself. He gave me a safe place to heal and the time to remember who I was before everything went wrong. That gift was more valuable than any rescue could have been. The Sullivan Ranch became a gathering place for the extended family. Holidays were loud, chaotic affairs with multiple generations crowding around the big dining table Jack had built years ago. Summer evenings often featured impromptu concerts, with Evangeline at the piano and various grandchildren singing or playing instruments they had learned from her. During one such gathering, when Jack was 72 and Evangeline 70, they found themselves alone in the kitchen while the family celebrated outside. They could hear music and laughter drifting through the windows, the sound of their legacy continuing. We did good, did we not? Evangeline said, looking out at the assembled crowd of children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren now. We did better than good, Jack replied, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind just as he had done countless times over the decades. We built something real and lasting. We created a family founded on love instead of obligation or convenience. Every single person out there exists because we were brave enough to take a chance on each other. Sometimes I still cannot believe how lucky I was, Evangeline said softly. That you walked into the Silver Dollar that particular night, that you looked at me and saw something worth fighting for, that you never gave up even when it would have been easier and safer to walk away. I was the lucky one, Jack insisted. You could have chosen safety over uncertainty. You could have stayed with Bentley's protection instead of trusting a cowboy with more determination than sense. But you took a chance on me, and that changed everything. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching through the window as their family celebrated. Henry was there with his wife and 3 children, a successful lawyer who had indeed followed Judge Harrington's path. Clara had brought her large brood, all of them musical and dramatic like their mother. Daniel and his wife were managing the ranch now, keeping the Sullivan legacy alive. Sarah had published 2 books of stories about frontier life, with a third on the way. Beyond their own children, there were in-laws and friends who had become family over the years. Mrs. Chen was still alive at 95, sitting in a place of honor and holding court with the youngest generation. Doc Weatherby had passed a few years back, but his son had taken over his practice and was here with his own family. Even Marshall White's grandson was present, having married Daniel's daughter. "You know what I realized," Jack said suddenly. "All those people who called me a fool back then. Most of them are dead now or moved on or do not even remember saying it. But we are still here, still together, still building our life every single day. We outlasted all the doubters and the critics, and we did it by simply refusing to let anyone else write our story." "The best revenge is living well," Evangeline agreed with a smile. "Though I prefer to think of it less as revenge and more as vindication. We proved that love can overcome circumstance, that people can change and grow, that the past does not have to dictate the future." As the sun set on another day at the Sullivan Ranch, Jack and Evangeline made their way back outside to join the celebration. Their grandchildren immediately surrounded them, begging for stories about the old days. Jack and Evangeline exchanged glances, silently communicating after decades of practice, and settled into their favorite porch chairs. "Tell us about when you met," one of the younger grandchildren requested. It was a story they had heard many times, but it never got old. "Well," Jack began, his eyes twinkling, "it all started when a fool named Riley Garrett shot me because I called him out for cheating at cards." Evangeline picked up the story, adding details and color that brought that long-ago night to life. The children listened with rapt attention, asking questions and exclaiming at the exciting parts. To them, it was ancient history, as distant as the Revolutionary War or the stories of the pioneers crossing the Oregon Trail. But to Jack and Evangeline, it felt like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. When the story was finished, as it always was, with their wedding and the building of their family, the children scattered to other activities. But a few of the older grandchildren stayed behind, their expressions thoughtful. "Grandmother," one of them asked, "do you ever miss singing on stage, in front of big audiences instead of just family?" Evangeline considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I wonder what might have been if I had taken a different path. If I had made it to San Francisco, if I had built a career in legitimate theaters instead of saloons. But wondering what if is not the same as regret. The truth is, I have had a richer, fuller life than any stage career could have given me. I have loved and been loved, raised wonderful children, watched them build their own families. What audience could possibly matter more than that? Your grandfather used to say that I sing only for him now," she continued, smiling at Jack. "But that was not quite true. I sing for all of you too, every lullaby, every folk song, every hymn at church. My voice belongs to the people I love, and that makes it more valuable than if I had shared it with thousands of strangers." Jack reached over and took her hand, a gesture so natural and automatic that neither of them had to think about it anymore. "Besides," he added, "if your grandmother had become a famous opera singer or something, she never would have ended up in Tombstone. Which means I never would have met her, you kids would not exist, and I would probably have lived a perfectly boring, lonely life raising cattle by myself." "I think we got the better deal." The grandchildren laughed and agreed, then wandered off to rejoin the party. Jack and Evangeline remained on the porch, hand in hand, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. "Do you think we will have many more nights like this?" Evangeline asked quietly. It was a question they had both been dancing around lately as age began to take its inevitable toll. "I hope so," Jack replied honestly. "But even if we do not, we have had enough good nights to fill several lifetimes. Whatever time we have left, we will make it count." "Just like we always have. Promise me something," Evangeline said, turning to look at him directly. "Promise that no matter what happens, you will not spend your final years dwelling on what you lost. Remember what we built instead. Remember the good times, the laughter, the love. Remember that we took two broken people and made something beautiful together. I promise, Jack said solemnly. As long as you promise the same, no regrets, no what-ifs, just gratitude for every moment we had together. Deal. They sealed the promise with a kiss, sweet and gentle, and full of the comfortable love that came from 40 years of partnership. Around them, the party continued, their family celebrating life and connection and all the things that truly mattered. Jack Sullivan died peacefully in his sleep 3 years later at the age of 75. He passed away on a spring morning with Evangeline beside him, just as he had hoped. His last words were, "Still the luckiest man in Arizona," which made Evangeline laugh through her tears. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, ranchers and townspeople and family members coming from as far away as California. They told stories about Jack's honesty, his work ethic, his kindness. They talked about how he had built his ranch from nothing and turned it into a legacy. But mostly they talked about his love for Evangeline, how it had been the defining feature of his life from the moment they met until his last breath. Evangeline grieved deeply, but not hopelessly. She had lost the love of her life, but she still had the family they had built together and the memories of 43 years of marriage. She continued to live on the ranch, now run entirely by Daniel and his children, and she continued to sing. Sometimes her voice would crack with emotion, especially when she sang the songs Jack had loved most, but she never stopped. "He asked me to remember the good times," she told anyone who worried about her. "To focus on what we built rather than what I lost. I owe him that much at least." Evangeline Rose Sullivan lived for another 8 years after Jack's death, surrounded by family and never lacking for company or care. She spent her final years compiling a detailed family history, documenting not just names and dates, but stories and lessons. She wanted future generations to know where they came from, what their ancestors had overcome, and why love and family mattered more than money or status or any of the other things people spent their lives chasing. When she died at the age of 78, it was during one of the big family gatherings she loved so much. She had been playing the piano, leading the grandchildren in song when she simply stopped, smiled peacefully, and closed her eyes. Doc Weatherby's son, who was present at the party, said later that it was the most graceful passing he had ever witnessed. They buried Evangeline next to Jack on a hill overlooking the ranch, exactly as she had requested. Their story became legend in Arizona, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But unlike most legends, this one was rooted in documented truth. Years later, when Sarah published her third book, she dedicated an entire chapter to her parents' love story. She had interviewed dozens of people who had known them, compiled letters and documents, and created what she hoped was an accurate picture of two people who refused to let circumstances define them. "In the end," she wrote in her conclusion, "my parents' story was not about a cowboy rescuing a damsel in distress. It was about two people recognizing something valuable in each other and being willing to fight for it. They came from different worlds, carried different traumas, and faced obstacles that would have destroyed weaker people. But they chose each other, every single day for more than 4 decades, and that choice changed not just their lives but the lives of everyone who came after them. People called my father a fool for loving a saloon singer. They said he was throwing away his future for a woman with a scandalous past. They predicted the marriage would fail, that he would regret his impulsive decision, that no good could come from such an unlikely union. They were wrong about everything. My father and mother built a life of remarkable love, created a family that now spans 4 generations, and proved that the only foolish choice is giving up on love when it presents itself. They taught us that the past does not define the future, that courage and determination can overcome any obstacle, and that the best revenge against those who doubt you is simply living well. When people asked my father in his later years if he regretted falling in love with a saloon singer, he always gave the same answer: "She sings only for me now. What he meant was that they had created something private and precious, a relationship that belonged only to them and could not be diminished by anyone else's opinions or judgments. That, perhaps more than anything, is the lesson their story teaches us. Love is not about grand gestures or fairy tale romances. It is about choosing someone and continuing to choose them day after day, year after year, through good times and bad. It is about seeing the best in each other even when the world sees only flaws. It is about building something together that is stronger than what either person could have built alone. My parents were not perfect people. They made mistakes, faced failures, and sometimes struggled with demons from their pasts. But they faced it all together with honesty and compassion and an unshakable commitment to their partnership. That is why their love endured. That is why their story matters. So let this be a testament to John Henry Sullivan and Evangeline Rose Sullivan, two people who refuse to let society's expectations dictate their happiness. Let it be a reminder that the bravest thing you can do is fight for love, even when everyone around you says it is foolish. And let it be an inspiration to anyone who has ever been told they are not good enough, that their past defines them, that they should accept less than they deserve. You are not defined by where you have been. You are defined by where you are going and who you choose to walk beside on the journey. My parents understood that truth, lived it every day, and left behind a legacy that will endure for generations. They called him a fool for loving a saloon singer. He called himself blessed. And from where I stand, looking at the family and the life they created, I think my father had it exactly right. Sarah's book became a bestseller, touching hearts across the country. People wrote to her sharing their own stories of unlikely love and overcoming obstacles. The Sullivan Ranch became a destination for couples who wanted to see where the famous love story had taken place. Daniel, who still managed the property, welcomed them graciously and always made sure to point out the hilltop where Jack and Evangeline were buried, where visitors could pay their respects to two people who had dared to defy convention and build something beautiful. The piano that Jack had bought for Evangeline all those years ago still sat in the ranch house, now carefully maintained and occasionally played by musically inclined family members. The house itself had been expanded and updated over the years, but the original rooms where Jack and Evangeline had started their life together were preserved, a museum to a love that had changed so many lives. On warm summer evenings, if you stood on that porch where Jack and Evangeline had spent so many hours talking and dreaming, you could almost hear echoes of her voice singing. The songs she had loved, the lullabies she had sung to her children, the hymns she had performed at church. Her voice had indeed sung only for those she loved in the end, but its impact had rippled outward in ways she could never have imagined. The story of Jack Sullivan and Evangeline Rose became more than just a family legend. It became a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever been told they were not good enough, that their past disqualified them from happiness, that love was only for certain people under certain circumstances. Their story proved that none of that was true, that love could flourish in the most unlikely places, between the most unlikely people, if both parties were willing to fight for it. They called him a fool for loving a saloon singer. But Jack Sullivan knew what everyone else took a lifetime to understand, that loving someone, truly loving them with your whole heart, is never foolish. It is the bravest, most intelligent thing a person can do. And when that love is returned, when two people choose each other and build a life together despite every obstacle in their path, that is not just a love story. That is a miracle. And so, on a ranch in Arizona that still bears the Sullivan name, beneath the endless desert sky where the stars shine as bright as they did over a century ago, the legacy continues. New generations are born, grow up hearing the story of their great-great-grandparents, and carry forward the lessons learned from two people who refused to let anyone else write their story. Jack Sullivan was called a fool for loving a saloon singer. But in the end, his foolishness gave birth to wisdom, his stubbornness created flexibility, and his love built something that has outlasted every person who doubted him. Evangeline Rose sang only for him in the end. But her song echoes still, a melody of hope and redemption and love that conquers all. And that song will continue to play for as long as there are people who believe that everyone deserves a second chance, that love is worth fighting for, and that the best stories are the ones where two imperfect people create something perfect together. This is the story of Jack and Evangeline Sullivan, a cowboy and a saloon singer, two people who should never have worked according to everyone around them, two people who proved that sometimes the best decisions are the ones everyone else thinks are foolish. Two people who loved each other so completely that their love literally built a legacy that continues generations later. They called him a fool. He called himself blessed, and history has proven him right.